Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our webinar today with SOCi, the State of Localized Marketing 2023. My name is Dara, and I'm the social media coordinator for Localogy, and I will be your host for today's event. There are a couple housekeeping items before we begin. This webinar is being recorded and will be circulated to all attendees with the presentation within 24 hours of the broadcast. Questions will be answered during the Q&A session at the end. You can, however, ask any question at any time during the broadcast. Just use that question window in your control panel. Our speaker today is Damian Rollison, Director of Market Insights at SOCi. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Damian to get us started.
Awesome. Thank you, Dara, and thank you everybody for joining. And I am joined today by Charles Laughlin, Senior Analyst at Localogy. Hey, Charles, thanks for joining as well.
Damian, awesome to be with you today.
Yeah, definitely. Charles and I go way back, so it's nice to be reunited today and to talk to you about the state of localized marketing for 2023. Obviously, that's a pretty broad topic, a lot that we could potentially cover. I'll go ahead and segue into this agenda slide and give you a sense for what we are actually going to be talking about today. So SOCi, the company that I work for, has just recently published a new white paper, which is called The High Cost of Invisibility for Multi-Location Enterprises. It's based on some research that we have also recently completed, which we call our Local Visibility Index. Some of you in the audience may be familiar with the SOCi research that we've done in the past, which was done under the brand or the name LMBR, or Localized Marketing Benchmark Report. So the Local Visibility Index is our rebranded version of that same report, which with some interesting updates and changes for 2023. It's on the basis of that research that we were able to derive some of the findings that we discuss in the white paper. So they kind of go hand in hand. But in the second part of the talk track, I will be diving into some of the results from the Local Visibility Index itself and some trends for 2023 that I hope you'll find interesting. And then we'll segue into some best practices for driving local engagement and revenue growth, and hopefully save some time toward the end for questions. Obviously, we're totally open to you asking questions in the question feature in GoToWebinar at any time, and we will, again, try to leave some time for those towards the end. So to dive into the first topic, our new white paper is really focused on, often in the past we've talked, when we talk about how multi-location brands are performing in local markets, we talk about it in a positive light. They're responding to a little bit more reviews than they did last year and that kind of thing. We wanted to kind of flip the script on that a little bit and talk about what are brands not doing, and what is that costing them in local markets. But to begin with, as far as the research that we conducted, this year's analysis includes about 600 different multi-location companies. SOCi as a company really focuses on that multi-location chain and franchise space, so that's why that's the focus of our report. I would say a lot of our findings are probably pretty applicable to SMBs as well, but there is that focus, so I want to make sure I set that stage properly. This year we're covering 39 different industries. So last year it was about half as many companies and about 24 industries. So we've really expanded the analysis for this year. We look, as we generally do, at three kind of pillars for local marketing. It's local search, reputation management, and then localized social media. So those three areas are our main areas of analysis. And in the white paper and in the Local Visibility Index, we provide success benchmarks and also tactics that brands can follow to outperform the competition and to achieve local visibility. So to begin with some of the, whoops, sorry, I skipped ahead there. To begin with sort of setting the stage, so we know that today's consumers expect a very high degree of digital availability, you might call it, from local businesses of all kinds. And to a great degree, these expectations have been formed by the rise of e-commerce. So we all use, Amazon and other e-commerce platforms, and our behaviors and our expectations have been set by the growth of e-commerce, which last year had its biggest year in history, right? And those platforms have trained us to be able to find product information about availability of any type of thing that we might want to buy, as well as the sort of ease of frictionless transactions in a way that is now kind of flowed down, we think, to local businesses as well, where after all, even though e-commerce is growing, 85% of US dollars are still spent with local businesses. And so those digital expectations for information, for engagement, for convenience, those are things that local businesses really need to pay attention to in order to be successful, in order to meet the demands of modern consumers.
So Damien, just
Yeah,
a quick thought: is this what you're really describing as a customer experience expectation that's been driven by digital experience, right? So,
yes.
and is that really driving? I mean, maybe this is getting ahead of things, but is that driving up the cost of business or just the challenge of doing business well?
I guess you could say both. If there are
Uh-huh.
operational things that a business needs to do in order to adhere to those expectations, then there may be some cost involved. I think what we're mainly focused on is just the lack of utilization of the opportunities that are out there. So, from a broad perspective, there's this storyline that I'm sure familiar with, where Google is trying to compete with Amazon to sort of win the e-commerce wars. And the way Google is approaching that is to, enable local inventories to be digitized, essentially, right? So that,
Right.
businesses are able to upload their inventory to Google Merchant Center and utilize tools within Google Business Profiles to make sure that people know which products are available locally. That's just a retail example, but generally speaking, Google has, appointment booking features, online ordering features, many different tools, Google Posts, where brands are able to advertise local availability or local tools that will ease the transaction process. But are brands actually using those features? A lot of them are not, right? And so that's where, the challenge is more one of just not recognizing the opportunity.
Right.
So to give you kind of a preview of the findings of the Local Visibility Index, and I'm going to start calling it the LVI just for convenience sake. So in the LVI for this year, we really find that brick and mortar brands are struggling to keep up with these online expectations. So for instance, brands are, you could say, virtually invisible. They don't appear in 2 out of 3 local searches in page 1 for their most important key terms. They're only showing up about a third of the time, according to our analysis. They ignore the vast majority, really, of the questions that consumers ask. You can see a screenshot of a typical example of a local drugstore where people are asking, can you answer your phone? Can I get a Moderna boost? Do you have TB tests? What is your fax number? Whatever the question might be, there's no answer from the brand, right? So those kinds of questions are being posted very frequently, and 92% of them are ignored by the typical brand. Typical business also does not respond to 54% of their reviews on Google. So not only do they not address people who have complaints and concerns, they're not even bothering to thank loyal consumers for their positive feedback. So lots of lack of engagement, really, at that local level. So we like to say that brands are effectively ghosting consumers, just to sort of, put it in contemporary terms. And not only that, but this invisibility is costing you money, your clients, businesses, actual dollars. And so what we've put together in our report is kind of an estimate for what we feel the actual dollar amounts lost for failing to perform well in local channels, what that actually equates to. And our analysis says that that's a $2.4 billion problem just in the US retail industry. We sort of focused on retail as our model for US chain and franchise businesses overall. And based on US Census data about the size of the US retail industry and several other points of analysis, and I'll dig into that a little bit more in a minute, our estimate is a $2.4 billion total loss of revenue. On the right-hand side, you can see how that breaks down for a typical retail brand. Our model is a retailer that has about 400 or so locations across the US. And failing to perform by showing up on page one in Google results, we believe, is costing that model brand about $17.7 million in lost revenue per year. Failure to respond to reviews is costing about $5.3 million. And failure to build local audiences on social platforms and cater to those audiences, that cost is about 1.3 million. And so taking those together and then rolling that out across the entire retail industry is how we come up with our $2.4 billion figure.
Hey, Damien.
Yeah.
Quick question. These are big numbers. What is your sense, just general sense, of what brand awareness of these numbers is? In other words, do they know they're leaking this much money, or do they know they're leaking any money?
I don't think they do. One of the things that we like to do at SOCi as we're talking to prospective brands about coming on board with us is ROI analysis. And that's, that's, as I'm sure you know, it's been a challenge in organic marketing to talk about ROI. It's a little bit easier in paid, where the evidence is very clear of what you're driving. In organic marketing, you have to do some inferences in order to really have that ROI conversation. But even though we try to be very conservative, our ROI figures are often double digits. And so, the ROI is there for organic marketing, which means the revenue is there, right? And I just think it's something that, again, because it's a little more abstract and difficult to calculate, I think it's something that brands are just not as aware of as they should be.
Okay.
So there's some math here. I'm going to try to explain it in a way that's relatively straightforward rather than sort of dragging you through a lot of figures. But basically, this is how we're calculating rather the $17.7 million for the typical brand in lost revenue for failing to appear in search. So our own data shows that the average brand location generates about 2,800 Google searches per month, and that 67% of them are ranked 4 or lower in Google local results. In other words, they're on page 2 for desktop and mobile. They're beyond that 3-pack, so they're not showing up on page 1. That the typical Google profile converts at about a 4% rate. And for an average transaction value of $50, you can see that the monthly revenue for that those lower ranked locations is about $3,800. The difference with the second equation is the higher conversion rate that, according to our studies, applies when you do appear on page 1. So instead of the 4% conversion rate, the page 1 listings converted about 7.7% according to our findings, and that equates to a difference where the monthly revenue goes up to about almost $7,400. And if you annualize that and then apply it to all of the locations for this typical brand, again, they've got about 415 locations is the mean across our retail data set, then you're going to end up with a total cost for that typical brand of about 17.7 million. So hopefully that makes sense. We dig into this in even a little bit more detail in the white paper itself, but just to give you a sense for how we're actually deriving that number. When it comes to reputation management, so we're basing our calculation on the same assumption about the size of the brand, 415 locations. Our own LVI data says that the average location generates 3 new reviews per month. So if you annualize that and then apply the finding that 54% of reviews are not responded to, which I was mentioning earlier, that is going to add up to 88,000 reviews across the entire brand that do not receive a response over the course of 12 months. 22% of reviews are negative. Again, that comes from our LVI data. So that's 1,775 negative reviews. If if the cost of a negative review is $3,000, which comes from a separate study from Shop Association, that means that the lost revenue for not responding to your negative reviews across the entire brand and across the course of a year adds up to $5.3 million.
Hey, Damien, this is a very narrow question, but that $3,000, is that offset to a certain amount by, and maybe you don't know the number, is that offset by any certain amount by a response to that review? For
Yes.
example, is that 3,000? Okay.
Yes. So we believe that the negative impact of a negative review is mitigated by responding to it. So this is what we're talking about, is ignoring the negative review. What is the cost of that? And we actually turned to a third-party study for this, which basically, the equation is based on the fact that a negative review makes it less likely that your business will convert. And so if you take what is the transaction value you would have gained, that's kind of how you get to that number.
Right.
We did our own, I did my own calculation based on SOCi data and came up with an even higher number than 3,000, but we decided to err on the side of being a little more conservative, just because that number itself is pretty high.
It is very high, yeah.
Yep. The cost of neglecting local audiences on social platforms is kind of our third calculation, and how we got to the $1.1 million total figure. What we actually relied on is a study called the Eisenberg Social Index, which some people may be familiar with, where Eisenberg has a kind of a proprietary methodology for attaching dollar amounts to various forms of social engagement. We're focused on Facebook here, but they have earned media values, they call them, which apply to engagements on many different social platforms. Really interesting data source if you'd be interested in checking that out. So for Facebook followers, Eisenberg assigns a value as of 2023. The value per Facebook follower for a brand is $4.40. And of course, we can quibble of should it be $5 or $3, but really the importance here is that we're able to measure, using that dollar amount, we're able to measure the difference between the average performer in our data set and the high performer. So if the average US chain or franchise has about 457 Facebook followers per store across the entire brand, and using that Eisenberg value, the total value of their social program would be about $834,000. But high performers in our data set, they have more than twice as many Facebook followers, 1,079 on average. So if you perform that, if you do that same calculation, then the high performers have $1.9 million, almost $2 million in value, driven through that same social channel. So the difference between the high performer and the average is a $1.1 million in value. So again, failing to encourage people to follow you and build your social audiences, that's how we've calculated that cost. So just to give you an example of a brand that actually is doing well, we focused a lot on the high cost of low performance, but this is a sort of even a counterintuitive and perhaps surprising example that we highlight within our data set, where Kohl's, who is obviously a traditional retailer, been around for a long time, and has in fact been struggling to compete in recent years with more contemporary department stores, let's say Target as an example. They've actually posted record profits, beating their own projections just recently. And what they've done as a way of kind of pivoting their local strategy is to pay attention to what differentiates them as a brand, paying attention to the needs of local consumers. They've expanded their cosmetics line, they're in partnership with Sephora, their line of pet supplies, home decor, gift offerings, in a way to really emphasize what Kohl's does well and what people really like about that store in comparison with other retailers. And they actually happen to be the top performing department store brand in this year's LVI results. They actually even outperformed Target and Macy's. And you can see an example here of Kohl's showing up in position 1 for department stores in Sunset Valley, Texas. Just one example of the great performance that they've been able to generate in the last 12 months. And then just to kind of give you a preview, we're about to dive into the LVI results in more detail, but just to show you how Kohl's is performing in relation to Macy's and Target, they have an overall local visibility score of 70. It's not that much higher than Macy's and Target, but it is still kind of surprising that they would score that high. And yet it does seem to correlate with their revenue results, as I've been mentioning. Their search score is especially competitive. You can see there their score is 82 compared to 78 for the two other brands, and they perform pretty well in comparison for their reputation and social scores as well. So the Local Visibility Index, let's talk about what that is, how we built it, why we built it. Actually, let's start with why. So why create the Local Visibility Index? This is actually our 5th annual report, although we did go through a rebranding this year, but we've been doing this analysis for 5 years now. We originally did it because we realized that there was no resource out there that would tell us what does it mean to do well as a local marketer, as a multi-location brand, when it comes to posting on social, responding to reviews, showing up in page 1, all of these things that we care about. But how often is that actually happening for a given brand in comparison with the average? How do you know you're doing well? So that's why really we created this analysis to establish those standards, to measure performance of the top multi-location brands, and to essentially establish benchmarks for good performance. So the really key concept in our study is the LVI benchmark, which is basically what we define it as the minimum level required to outperform the average competitor. So the data set is 600 top multi-location brands in the US, 39 industries covered. Google, Yelp, and Facebook are the 3 platforms that we focus on. Our data partner is Places Scout. I'm sure a lot of people know that platform, and Mark, who founded that company. They're able to provide us with an objective data set, which includes lots and lots of data points around these 3 platforms. We audited 106,000 total locations. Every single location is analyzed according to 100 different metrics developed in collaboration with Places Scout. We've amassed millions of reviews, thousands of local posts, millions of engagements in order to really amass the full data set. And what SOCi does is we take that raw data from the Places Scout platform, and we apply our own methodology for weighting, scoring, and analyzing the results in order to come up with the findings that we're going to be talking about. So we developed a scoring methodology which is based on the concept of a local visibility score. That's a score on a 100-point scale. The social, search, and reputation categories are also scored on a 100-point scale, and so the local visibility score ends up being just the average of those 3. Underneath each of the 3 categories are several subcategories, and then the metrics are kind of organized under the subcategories. And you can see that there's weighting. The different sizes of the sectors kind of help to visually indicate the weighting of the different subject areas. And you know, we spent a lot of attention looking at how the scores are weighted based on industry studies like local search ranking factors, based on our own research. So everything is not equivalent, right? You know, profile optimization is more important than reviews for local ranking, for example. So a lot of thought goes into exactly how to construct and weight those metrics. So to dive into the results for 2023, local visibility score, the overall score, is what we're looking at on the left-hand side, and how does that track over the last couple of years. So this year, the average company scores at a 50, right in the middle of the 100-point scale, and that actually does represent some incremental improvement. So from a more positive viewpoint than what we've been discussing in the first part, we do see that brands are doing a slightly better job year over year in responding to the needs of consumers in local markets. And as that breaks down across our three main categories, you can see that search shows signs of growth, although it's been a little bit bumpy with a lower score in 2022 than either of the other last 3 years. But search is the highest score overall at 54 for this year across all three categories. Reputation was not a separate category in 2021, so we just have the last 2 years to compare. It's flat at 46, actually the lowest of the three scores. And then social shows the greatest signs of growth. It was only a 34 in 2021 for the average brand, and now the average brand is scoring 50. So brands have begun to kind of figure out what to do within social platforms, at least to a greater degree than was the case a couple of years ago.
Hey, Damien, I'm just curious, with social showing such a jump, um, what do you think are the sort of external or internal drivers of, clearly it seems like a lot more attention has been in that direction than in the other areas, if that's fair. And what do you think
Well,
is driving that?
if you look at it from really kind of a macro perspective,
Mhm.
the digital universe is moving towards social, right? That's
Right, of
that's
course,
been
yeah.
happening. Yeah. And so, if you think about like the notorious finding that Google mentioned last summer, I think it was, that 40% of Gen Z would rather use TikTok or Instagram to find a
Hmm.
place to have lunch than Google, right?
Right.
That's probably indicative of what that shift is really all about. And
So social is becoming search in some sense, in a way.
yeah, yeah, and the other way around too. I mean,
Hmm.
obviously, Google in response to that is socializing search as much as they
Yeah,
can
right.
figure out how to do that, right? But yeah, I think that brands are just kind of waking up to that. The other thing I would say is that 34 or 50 or whatever the score, that's across all industries.
Right.
What the other thing I would point out is, restaurants, retail brands, they've been on top of social for a while now.
Yeah, there's some leaders and there's some outliers and some laggers, right? So
Yeah, it's other verticals like financial services, for
yeah,
example, or many others you could think of that might be a little bit less at the forefront. They're the ones who are kind of catching up these
right.
days.
They're driving this number up more so than say restaurants are the ones who've been there for a while. Is that fair?
Absolutely. Restaurants were already up in the 70s
Right,
even
right, right, right.
years ago, definitely. Yeah. So as far as revenue growth, the other kind of top level analysis that we've done is to track year over year revenue growth for the average company against category leaders and then the top 10 overall companies in our data set. You can see their scores on the left. So if the average company is scoring a 50, the category leaders, the top restaurant brand, et cetera, their average is a 65, and then the top 10 companies average a score of 77. For revenue growth, we find that across the entire data set, most brands are growing, not all, but the average growth rate is about 15% year over year. For those category leaders, the growth rate is about 20%, but for the top 10, it's 29%, which is just about twice the rate of the average company, which of course is not a claim about causation. We don't believe that local marketing is the driver for all of that revenue growth, but there does seem to be a correlation there, and that the things that we're measuring are part of a larger picture, which
Yeah.
suggests these are the brands that are really figuring things out and doing well, as the Kohl's example helped to illustrate.
Right. I'm curious about something, and you may not have this at the ready, but are there companies that, by their financials or whatever measure you look at, do well even though they score low here, and the opposite? I mean, are there,
Yes. Yes.
yeah, I would imagine there are, you know,
The
and
trend
I don't know
overall.
if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, the overall trend is bucked by certain examples. A great example of something like what you're talking about is a a very aggressive national marketer like a McDonald's, where they may be, or Chipotle is another good example of this. Chipotle doesn't do a lot of the things that we would recommend that a brand should do. They don't respond to their reviews. They don't really pay attention to marketing at the local level, but they're just doing really well anyway. you know. And,
People like
and
those
so
burrito bowls, I guess. Yeah,
that's right.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
why, in fact, the top performing company, I don't have a slide for this, but the top performing company in the LVI overall is Dutch Brothers Coffee, which is
Uh-huh.
interesting because their
Because I've never
revenue,
heard of them.
well, but ask around. They're actually
Uh-huh.
they opened up a location in my town for the first time, and there's a line at their drive-through all day long. And
Why is that? I mean, we don't have to spend all day on Dutch Brothers, but
because
what are they doing?
they have an interesting menu, kind of like Dunkin' Donuts.
Okay,
And people really love their kind of unusual drink offerings. I don't frankly know that much about it, but
okay, that's fine.
I know that they're super popular. And the thing to point out about that is, who would you think would be the top coffee brand? Well, I mean, it's obvious, right? But
Yeah, of
Starbucks
course.
too does not really engage locally as much. And so what we're talking about is not really a measure of overall brand success
Yeah,
as local engagement. And for brands
right.
who want to compete with a Starbucks, who,
This
you
is a way in.
know,
This is a way
this
in
is
for them.
exactly
Okay,
incrementally growing your
right.
local audience is a way to do that.
So
Yeah,
this is really important messaging for a challenger brand.
exactly,
Okay,
exactly. Yeah, with Dutch Brothers being a perfect example. Yeah,
exactly, exactly. Yeah.
or even Kohl's, who may have been dominant at one time, but now would consider themselves a challenger, right? So what are some of the individual metrics that go into the overall scores that we've been talking about? So this is just, a page full of numbers, but for those of us who are kind of living in local marketing, this stuff is gonna kind of, obviously be interesting. The profiles claimed and profile completeness measures across 2022 and 2023 for both Google and Yelp are pretty strong. Not surprisingly, most brands are claiming their profiles and optimizing them pretty well. But it is notable that profile completeness did drop this year for Google to 94% compared to 98 last year. There are some fields, we were talking earlier about, appointment booking URLs. There's, secondary categories where if you want to be competitive, you really do need to fill out as many available fields in those profiles as possible. Interestingly, three-pack presence, although brands are only showing up a third of the time, as I mentioned earlier, that is up about 9 points from last year, where it was only about a quarter of the time. This year, we're introducing appearance on page 1 of Yelp as well, and I thought it was kind of fascinating that that's almost the same number as locations appearing in the three-pack at 32% compared to 33%. Average review count on Google is down from 224 to 179. People will probably know that Google did a pretty aggressive cleanup, maybe over-aggressive cleanup of fake and fraudulent reviews last year with some new AI methodology that they have, which may have gotten rid of more reviews than they really should have. And so that's kind of trending downward. But speaking to the rise of social that we were just talking about, we also think that the drop in review volume is due to a downturn in the popularity of writing reviews. We actually have a whole separate study that we released last fall, which shows that Google review volumes peaked around 2018, 2019, that in the pandemic era, they really took a dive and they have not yet recovered to their prior levels. And so I think, there's no indication here that reviews are going to disappear tomorrow. They're still going to be a critical factor in local marketing for some time to come, but I think that there's a long-term projection that we can make that eventually, reviews are going to take their place alongside short form video recommendations and these kind of more, trending
Right.
activities, and they will be a little less important than they've been in the past.
Are you seeing anything at Yelp which leans more on written reviews, right? So,
Yeah.
any trends from Yelp that are informing this that
Well,
you're
Yelp did not change their review moderation methodology
right?
last year, and yet their volumes are also trending downward by a little bit. 20 reviews on average last year versus 15 this year. So I think that the trend is kind of, that's a supporting data point for what I'm
Right,
saying. I think, yeah.
right, right.
Um, I mentioned that brands are ignoring 54% of their reviews. They are responding to 46%, which is 10% more or 10 points more than last year. So that is a good sign. They're also responding more quickly. So 6 days to respond to the average Google review, 8 days for Yelp. We think it should be even quicker than that, but it is a pretty strong sign of improvement over last year. I skipped over a rating. So 4.2 is the average rating last year and this year for Google. Yelp at 3.2. We all know that Yelp reviews trend a little more negative. That's just kind of the ecosystem of Yelp. And so people do need to understand that a 3.5 on Yelp is a much better result than a 3.5 on Google, for example. As far as locations on page 1 for Google Organic, this is whether your local landing pages are showing up on the first page or the first 10 results for Google Organic, now that we have continuous scroll on desktop and mobile. So that's only happening about 2% of the time. Very difficult to get on page 1 for your local landing pages, although some brands do achieve that. Brands are not utilizing local business schema as often as they should. In fact, that metric went down significantly this year. As for social, excuse me, so profile completeness is a little bit better than it was last year on Facebook, although brands do still need to fill out more of their available fields. Followers per page is down a little bit at 457. We definitely encourage brands to, encourage people to follow them on Facebook locally. 8.9 posts per month. If you're curious about how often you should be posting on Facebook as a brand, or how often your clients should be posting, well, if you post more than 9 times a month, then you're in that upper tier. Posts with images run at about 70% or so, down slightly from last year. Video posts are down quite a bit, 10% last year, 2.4 this year. We don't really think that that's a sign that brands are using video less. That would be really, kind of against the overall trends that we see. What we think is happening there is that they're doing less video on Facebook in preference to posting video content on other platforms like Instagram and especially TikTok, where in the last year, lots of brands have kind of pivoted to put their a lot of their attention for that kind of marketing into TikTok. The
Hey,
average,
Damien,
yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. The whole TikTok question is interesting because there's no do you have metrics about the impact that TikTok is having? And if you don't, that's fine. But the reason I ask is we've done a lot about TikTok creation at our events, and the thing that always comes out is the need for an understanding of what good native TikTok creation is, and how
Yeah.
big a difference there is between good and bad. And I don't know if you have anything that picks up quality execution and the impact of that.
This is an area that we need to do more research in. The challenge has been that TikTok is really only relevant in one little corner of localized marketing, which is
Right.
video, video-based marketing, and often, working with influencers. It's an
Right.
area that doesn't really apply for a lot of the other things that we study, and so
Right,
it's
because this
kind
sort
of
of
an
you do it or you don't do it, and the impact of that, and with TikTok, it gets a lot into sort of how well you're doing it, and so that's why I asked.
Exactly. I'll talk a little bit about overall recommendations for
Okay.
social media marketing that do kind of touch on this in just a second, actually.
Okay.
So to kind of round this out, we see lower engagement numbers in terms of likes, comments, and shares per post, as well as overall engagement rate compared to last year. But that's actually due to an adjustment that we made internally, where now we are differentiating between what's called waterfall posting on Facebook as opposed to localized posting. So we're actually not giving you as much credit if you're just waterfalling content down from your corporate parent page, which really is those engagements are aggregated across the entire brand. So for an individual location, they don't really count for as much as they would appear to. So removing that from the equation, we now have what we think are actually much more realistic numbers this year for the actual number of engagements generated per location by the average brand. Posts per month, only 0.3 posts for the average brand, barely up from last year. We think that's Google posts, as you can see at the bottom there. That's something that brands really should be doing more of. And then we've already talked about the fact that brands only respond to, well, they ignore 92% of the questions people ask on Google, only responding to 8%. I wanted to just round things off by spending a minute talking about the most improved brand of 2023, which is Pet Supplies Plus. They were 44th in the overall rankings last year with a score of 62, and they actually made it to number 5 this year with a score of 78. That's a really impressive turnaround, and one that reflects some things that this brand is really doing well, and I'm going to give you a kind of a quick tour of that. So the average local rank for this brand for searches for pet supplies near me is actually 1.7, which is pretty amazing. Now, take into account that their name is Pet Supplies Plus and the search is for pet supplies near me, that does give them an advantage, as we know, with the local ranking factor of the business of keywords in the business name. However, it's still impressive. They obviously have competition and that they are outperforming there. 95.5% of their locations do appear in the 3-pack. They have improved over the last year the utilization of their URL field in Google profiles to list their local landing pages, and their landing pages themselves are really nicely constructed, as I'll show you in a second. They've also improved their profile completeness on Google, Yelp, and Facebook with better matching of contact info across those sites, as well as improved photo content. And they are utilizing Google Posts, which we were just talking about, to promote offers in their stores at a rate of 1.7 posts per month. So all really strong signs of performing well in search. Their Google profiles, you can see this example, Pet Supplies Plus in Delray Beach, Florida, ranking position 1, well optimized. And to point out the kind of symbiotic nature of local and organic ranking, look at how well their local landing page is ranking just below the 3-pack at position 1 organic. So that's really amazing. And those two things do definitely reinforce each other. You know, the performance of your landing page is really going to help you rank well in the 3-pack and vice versa. Their landing pages are not incredibly fancy, but they are informative. They have all their basic contact information, their schema markup in place, some compelling imagery, and really notably, they do a very good job of listing out all of the individual services available at each location, which are not all the same. So that you can quickly find out whether this is one of their locations that carries live fish or has a bakery, and that's going to be very useful to consumers as well as for SEO purposes. They are great at engaging with their feedback in terms of review response across all of the sites where people are leaving reviews for the brand. They've improved their response times. As of the analysis that we performed, they are responding to more than 96% of their Google reviews with an average response time of just under 2 days. Almost 87% of their reviews on Yelp, which is really notable. The benchmark is only 6% response on Yelp, 6.6 day average response time there. And more than 83% of Facebook recommendations, which, as you probably know, are Facebook's equivalent to reviews, with a response time of 1.8 days. So really vigilant about responding to reviews comprehensively and in a timely fashion. And then building local audiences on social platforms. So they've, as far as Facebook is concerned, they've grown their follower counts for all of their store pages, and they're really focused on engaging audiences. They post 24.2 times per month per location on Facebook. They use photo and video content in a healthy mix, and they earn about 14 engagements per post, sometimes even more. So this is their Facebook page for that same Delray Beach, Florida location, which is well optimized and has engaging content. They know very well that pet store people who frequent pet stores like pictures of pets. And these 3 posts that I've pulled out are actually all of them posts that have generated more than 100 engagements. And these are localized posts. You can see the Delray Beach, Florida indicator at the top of each one in that tiny little text there, indicating that those are posts natively from that store location. So they're really following best practices for social as well. So to round it out, I just wanted to give some, very simple top takeaways for increasing visibility in these 3 category areas. As far as search, you want to, first of all, just focus on increasing your 3-pack presence by optimizing your Google profiles to the greatest extent possible, making use of all those features and fields that Google makes available to you depending on your business category. Claim and optimize all other key profiles on sites like Yelp and Facebook. And of course, depending on the industry that you're in, there may be other sites like TripAdvisor that are important. Certainly don't neglect Apple Maps. So all of those key sites that generate consumer traffic need to be attended to. And then don't neglect to create informative, properly coded local landing pages and link those pages to your Google profiles and other profiles as well, but especially the Google business profiles need to have those local landing pages linked to them to get the optimal value out of both. As far as local reputation, respond to as many reviews as possible on all platforms in a timely fashion. We recommend responding within 24 to 48 hours. And by the way, don't neglect to use reviews as a source of consumer feedback to improve your store operations. After all, if people are complaining about stuff in your reviews and those topics come up over and over again, that probably means you need to make some fundamental changes. We've had clients who use reviews in order to improve their staff training as kind of little case studies and things that can go wrong in the store. And there are many different ways to utilize reviews in order to make your business better, which will lead to better reviews over time. And then when it comes to social, encourage page followers at the local level. Follow us on Facebook, signage in the store, and that kind of thing. Post at or above benchmark frequency each month to engage with your local audiences. Use photos and video. Video doesn't have to be with every post, but it should be some healthy proportion of the content that you post. Create engaging, informative, and helpful content to keep audiences interested. You really want to think about what is your brand voice? Who are you as a brand? If you're a pet store, it may be pictures of people's pets or the services that you provide. If you have an expertise in a certain area, sharing helpful how-to type content might be the winning equation for you. And again, that kind of equates to, that relates to TikTok or any other platform. The most important thing that you need to do is to decide what kind of brand voice you want to broadcast in social, and to make that decision in light of what you feel would be the most appealing thing for your particular audience, and execute on that strategy. We do cover lots of industries. As I mentioned, 39 separate industries in the Local Visibility Index overall. This is just a picture of that full list with actually ranked in order of their average local visibility scores. So you can see a little bit about which verticals are performing really well and which ones are still sort of growing in their local marketing journey, you might say. This is partly to give you an idea for the full breadth of the analysis, which you can actually take a look at yourself. So one of the big things that we've done this year, which I haven't talked about yet, is the release of our new local visibility dashboard, which is an online dashboard. You can check it out by visiting lvi.meetsoci.com. And there you can see visualizations of all of the data that I've been talking about, plus more. And the dashboard gives you the ability to filter and drill down to individual industries, the full list that I've just shown you, so that you can see what are the benchmark scores and metrics for any industry that you might be interested in, whether you have clients in that industry or you're an SEO working within a particular industry. If you're interested in exploring that data, please do check it out. You can also request an audit for a particular business. If you'd like to have us audit you and see how you measure up to our benchmarks for the industry that that business belongs to, we're happy to do that for you. You can also make that request at lvi.meetsoci.com. So that's about it, Charles. Happy to answer any questions from you or
Sure.
from the group.
I've got a mixture of all of the above. First of all, we got not a question, but a shout out for Dutch Brothers Coffee from the audience.
Oh, great.
I need to find whether there's one near me. That's not
I
really a
think
question.
if
I
you're
can
cool,
look.
you actually call it Dutch Bros, I'm told.
Oh, okay.
But
Now, thanks for the heads up. So when I walk into my first Dutch Bros,
yeah,
I'll know to bro it out there. Okay.
yep,
My big question that I always ask whenever this kind of content is discussed is why all the resistance to responding to reviews? It just seems like anyone who does
yeah,
search locally knows how important that is,
yeah.
and why is there so much resistance to that?
I could talk for a long time about that topic
Well,
because
maybe a short answer would be good, but yeah,
I'll try. Yeah, I've spent years pitching this to multi-location brands, and often, some of them get it right away. Often, if
yeah.
it's part of their culture already to be super responsive to consumer feedback, then this will be a natural for them. But for
Hmm.
some brands, it isn't. And it's often if the brand thinks of itself as a kind of a commodified offering, that they
Hmm.
think, why do people really care about the difference between this store and this other store? And not to call them out, but 7-Eleven would be an example, of like,
Uh-huh. But
what
let's
difference
call them out anyway.
what difference is it going to make? But the reason I mentioned 7-Eleven, they actually do review response now. I was shocked to
Okay.
discover this, but they're responding to like most of their reviews today. And
Like
so this is
broken
something
Slurpee machines or that kind of thing, or
yeah, exactly.
yeah.
And I I haven't really brought up SOCi offerings too much, but I will mention that we've just launched a new offering called Genius Reviews that uses
Hmm.
generative AI to respond to reviews at scale. And that's something that, it's important to have human moderation in the mix,
Right.
but using those kinds of tools, I think really opens up being able to scale this in a way that more brands are going to want
Well,
to.
brands are going to want to know how to use AI to do this for them.
Yeah.
So you may as well do it. You may as well be there. You know.
Exactly. Yeah. So that removes, I think that will remove a lot of the prior
Okay.
objections. Yeah.
That's fair. Now the other quick thing was you mentioned the 3-pack several times,
Yeah.
and I know the 3-pack. A lot of the answer to how to get in the 3-pack is be attentive to SEO ranking factors, etc. What are
Yep.
the other key drivers there that you teach brands?
Well, you can't necessarily control all of those factors. In fact, there's a
Right.
ton of them. If you know the, local search ranking factors and other studies, there are a ton of factors like proximity that,
Mhm.
you're not going to be able to
Right.
influence.
If you're not in the right
So
location, you're not in the right location, right? Yeah.
that's right. So the main things in terms of local ranking are things like primary and secondary category, there are certain aspects of your Google profile that are proven to directly influence ranking. The most recent one that there have been various tests and studies done on is the services that are associated with your categories are now kind of niche ranking factors. So if you're a plumber and you fix leaky faucets or something, as long as it's one of the pre-configured services that Google has available in your profile, if you enable that service, then that's a ranking factor. Keywords in your local landing pages is another one that you have a lot more control over than some of the other things. So, you know, you want to make sure that those are really built out to list all of the, you know, services and offerings and maybe key products that you want to highlight. And I would say overall profile optimization, but one thing to really focus in on that a lot of brands and businesses neglect is photo optimization. So in our analysis, the majority of photos in a Google profile are uploaded by random Google users, not by the merchant. But the merchant stands to really show up well in search because Google's going to actually showcase photo content right there in the 3-pack, right there in the, or, you know, in the search result based on the intent of the searcher. So make sure you've got photo content in your profiles that matches what you want to rank for. That's another big factor.
Okay, so we're getting up against time, so I'm just going to wrap up with a couple of kind of process questions we got from the audience. There was a question about which industries, but you kind of gave that slide toward the end, the 39 different industries. Maybe I'll ask, are there any other that are, what are the ones that are most aligned with the industries you most prominently serve as SOCi?
With
In
the
other
industries
words,
that we most prominently.
Of those 39, what are the biggest ones for you, I guess is another way to ask.
Oh, right, okay. We have more than 600 multi-location brand clients today, and it actually covers just about everything on the list. But as you might
but
imagine,
there's going to be some ranking there, so go ahead.
that's right. Yeah, we're pretty strong in restaurants. We're pretty strong in retail. We're growing in healthcare and financial services.
Okay.
And another area that might be kind of not obvious to others that ends up being a kind of a niche market for SOCi is property management. We actually started with a big emphasis on the property vertical. So the owners and managers of apartment buildings and communities is another one that we have a very large clientele for.
Okay, that's interesting. So let's end it with just very simple question. How do people find all the data you've been sharing today?
So go to LVI, which is Local Visibility Index, lvi.meetsoci.com. You can find a link to download the white paper that we've been talking about. You can find the local visibility dashboard linked from that page as well. And as I mentioned a second ago, if you're interested in requesting an audit from us, there is a form to file that request, which is something that we can run as a custom report for your brand or your client's brand and show you how you measure up against those benchmarks. So that's lvi.meetsoci.com.
And one very quick last thing, the dashboard, can I look at it on my smartphone?
It works a little better on desktop. So
Okay.
I would recommend desktop. It's really just a somewhat complex set of charts and graphs, etc. So yeah, it is built to be responsive, but I would say the desktop experience is a little bit easier to use.
Okay, fair enough. Dara, you want to take it away?
Yes, thank you, Charles. And also thank you, Damien and the SOCi team. Great questions, great presentation, awesome discussion. Thank you so much for putting this webinar together for us. Just a few more items from Localogy before we end today's webinar. You will be able to view today's broadcast along with previous webinars on our website, localogy.com. Just navigate to research and resources and then toggle down to webinars. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please be sure to visit localogy.com and subscribe for updates to be the first to know about future webinars. Have a great day, everyone.